Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to completely dissect a brilliant, undeniable musical machine. We're looking at the exact architecture, the masterminds, and the physical spaces that brought a revolutionary sound to the world, seamlessly bridging two of the most iconic eras in music history.
Okay, let's just jump right in. What exactly is the musical bridge between 1960s Motown and 1970s disco? Well, if you've ever danced at a wedding to a classic disco anthem or, nodded your head to a hip-hop sample from an artist like Jay-Z, you have actually already experienced the answer.
The answer is orchestral soul, or as it's more widely known, Philly soul. It's this incredibly lush style of 1970s R&B. Just imagine taking the raw emotion of gospel, mixing it with the vocal harmonies of doo-wop, and then completely drowning it in the sweeping grandeur of classical symphonies. As one legendary musician described it, it was literally soul in a tuxedo. You had this relentless, driving funk rhythm, but it was dressed up in the absolute finest, most elegant orchestrations imaginable.
Here is the track list for how we're going to break this down. 1. The Motown Disco Bridge. 2. Architects of Orchestral Soul. 3. The Sigma Sound Laboratory. 4. MFSB, The Secret Ingredient. 5. Music with a Message. And finally 6. Legacy and Lost Ownership. Let's get into it.
Part 1. The Motown Disco Bridge. To understand why this sound emerged when it did, we really have to look at the cultural vibe of the late 1960s and early 1970s. It was a time of massive transition. On one side, you had 1960s Motown, which was culturally associated with this fizzing, integrationist optimism. And on the other side, waiting in the late 1970s, was disco, a genre pegged as glamorous, hedonistic, and totally liberated. But right there in the middle, the Black community was in motion and needed a new voice. The turbulent social struggles of the era were raging on, and people needed a sound that acknowledged those harsh realities while also promoting self-determination, community, and self-love.
And honestly, Fred Wesley, the legendary trombonist for James Brown's band, he totally hit the nail on the head. He called Philly soul putting the bow tie on funk. It was the ultimate bridge. It took that raw, gritty, rhythmic momentum of funk and dressed it up with classical orchestration. So it wasn't just raw emotion anymore, it was elevated, cinematic drama.
Part 2. Architects of Orchestral Soul.
So who actually engineered this highly specific, beautifully dressed-up sound? The foundation was built by a core trio of brilliant musical minds, Kenneth Gamble, Leon Huff, and Tom Bell. Now, Tom Bell was actually a classically trained pianist. He grew up in a house where only classical music was allowed, and he dreamed of being a conductor. That classical background is what drove his wild desire to add sweeping orchestral opulence to R&B. He literally heard oboes and bassoons in his head, where everyone else just heard guitars and drums.
The dynamic between these creators was just pure magic. As Bell himself put it, Gamble and Huff were the maestros of soul. They really captured that deep, visceral grit of the genre. Meanwhile, Bell and his frequent songwriting partner Linda Creed, they crafted the poetic, romantic symphonies. They brought the heart. Together, it was like a perfectly balanced musical ecosystem.
Then came the real game changer, 1971. That year, Gamble and Huff founded Philadelphia International Records, or PIR, and they secured a distribution deal with CBS. This was huge. It gave a Black-owned institution the massive corporate reach of a major label. But, and this is crucial, they retained total creative control. That powerful combination allowed them to largely eclipse Motown's popularity by 1975.
Part 3. The Sigma Sound Laboratory.
But to create a truly distinct sound, you need a distinct physical space. Enter Sigma Sound Studios on North 12th Street in Philadelphia. Founded by former electronics engineer Joe Tarzia, this studio became an instrument in its own right. Tarzia demanded absolute, unapologetic professional excellence. Fun fact, Sigma was actually famous for running ads boasting about how clean their bathrooms were. I know it sounds crazy, but Tarzia wanted everyone to know this was a highly respectable, strictly professional environment, and that made the musicians step up and perform at their absolute best. Let's look at one of Tarzia's engineering hacks, because this is absolutely fascinating. The studio room was actually pretty small, which usually means heavy microphone bleed when recording an ensemble. So to get that massive, lush string sound, Tarzia used a modest 6-2-1 string section. He'd play the backing track through tiny speakers in the room while the strings played along. Then, without anyone moving, they would double the recording, but Tarzia would flip the phase reversal switches on the console. This meant the speakers playing the backing track would be out of phase, completely canceling out the audio leakage. Boom! He made a 9-piece string section sound like a colossal symphony.
Part 4, MFSB, the secret ingredient. Of course, an amazing studio doesn't mean much without amazing musicians, and there was an incredible concentration of talent in that one room. This collective was known as MFSB, which stood for Mother, Father, Sister, Brother. We're talking about a tight-knit family of over 30 session musicians. You had Earl Young literally inventing the disco drumbeat with his driving hi-hats, Ronnie Baker on that deep bass, Norman Harris on guitar, Vince Montana Jr. bringing in all that texture with vibraphones, and Don Ronaldo leading those lush strings. Their chemistry was the literal heartbeat defining the label's entire output.
And just look at this rapid rise. A few years after the label was formed, MFSB recorded an instrumental track named TSOP, or The Sound of Philadelphia. Don Cornelius heard it and asked for it to be the new theme song for his hit TV show Soul Train. By 1974, it skyrocketed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. That made it the first television theme song ever to hit #1. This band wasn't just playing the background anymore, they were leading the charts and laying the groundwork for the very first commercial 12-inch singles.
Part 5, music with a message.
Now, despite the glittering sound and all the dancing, you have to realize this music was deeply rooted in social conscience. Kenneth Gamble was a lyricist with a profound vision for his community. He and Huff used their massive platform to diagnose historical injustices. A perfect example is the OJ's track, For the Love of Money. They completely flipped their own script on this one. They stripped away all the beautiful romantic strings and replaced them with a menacing, funky bass line and trumpets that sounded like blaring warning sirens. It was this unflinching look at the evils of materialism. They never shied away from the heavy political realities of the time.
And they didn't just sing about it either, they took action. In 1977, they released Let's Clean Up the Ghetto, which featured an absolute all-star lineup of the label's talent. We're talking Lou Rawls, Teddy Pendergrass, the OJs. But this wasn't just a song. It was a direct community intervention. The record raised actual, real-world funds for neighborhood improvement programs across Philadelphia. It was this perfect, powerful blend of Black pride and direct action.
Part 6, Legacy and Lost Ownership.
So what does this all mean today? Well, the cultural shockwave of orchestral soul is absolutely still felt. It was so potent that David Bowie actively sought out Sigma Sound to completely reinvent his sound for his album Young Americans. The rhythmic pulse developed by MFSB literally created the foundation for global disco, and later, that lush instrumentation became one of the most heavily sampled catalogs in modern hip-hop history. In their prime, PIR generated an astonishing 15 gold singles and 22 gold albums. Truly massive.
But, and here's where the story takes a bittersweet turn. Mighty 3 Music, which was the publishing company founded by Gamble, Huff, and Bell that held the rights to all these era-defining hits, was eventually sold to Warner Chappell Music for $15 million. Now, while that sale definitely highlighted the immense commercial value of the catalog, it also marked the end of an era. The master recordings and publishing rights were no longer owned by the independent black record company that built them from the ground up.
Which really leaves us to ponder this final, complex reality.
A sound created to uplift a community in motion, engineered in a tiny Philadelphia laboratory by brilliant black artists and entrepreneurs, ultimately lost its independent ownership. As you listen to the echoes of Philly soul and everything from classic disco to modern hip-hop, you kind of have to ask yourself, when a sound completely changes the world, who truly owns the soul of the music? Thank you so much for exploring this with us. Keep questioning and keep learning.